Welcome back, colleagues. It's good to be with you. This is Learn Extra Teacher Talk, and we're focusing on physical sciences today. In studio with me is Dr. Angela Stott from the University of Cape Town, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about her research and a little bit about herself and some of the exciting developments that are happening in the field of physics education. So thanks again for being here, Angela. It's good to have you. Just to start off, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? What's your teaching background? Where have you come from and what you're doing today?
Well, I started teaching when I was 3 years old. So I had all my dolls there, and corporal punishment was allowed in those days. And then I progressed to human beings when I was about 5 years old. And by the time I was in high school, I had a string of kids that were always following me, and I made learner books for them, workbooks and stuff like that. So I was really in a hurry to actually start in my own classroom. So I began teaching the moment I left school. So I had no qualifications except matric, and I did all my studying up till the current studying I'm doing now through correspondence while teaching full-time. So I did a BSc and a BSc Honours, and then I did a Master's in Science Education and a PhD. Then I got a scholarship to UCT, where I'm doing a postdoc, and that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Sure, that's a really interesting route that you've taken. So what made you want to teach and to study at the same time? I mean, that must have been quite difficult.
Well, obviously, I wanted to improve myself. I needed a qualification, that's one thing. But then as far as the research into science education was concerned, I've always wanted to teach well. And if you're a teacher, you'll know that often you stand in front of the class, and at the end, when you think you've done really well, and when you mark the tests, you realize that all that time was wasted, it seems, because the kids don't really learn that well. So I wanted to know, how can I get more out of the time that I have with the kids? And so I was wanting to undergo some critical reflection, and obviously the place to do that is within research.
Yes. So out of this desire to really improve yourself and to become more familiar, what were the motivating factors that led you into researching physics education?
Well, I got into physics education. I actually started off in primary school, and then I started teaching high school and especially physical science. I taught a lot of subjects as well. And so obviously I wanted to improve my teaching of physics because that's what I was teaching, yes.
Yes. Yeah. And so what were the critical levers that sort of started to ask critical questions? Why go into a particular field of research? What were the prompts? What were the things from your classroom experience that led you to ask those critical questions?
Okay. The question that I'm looking at in this talk is what I based my PhD on, which was, how does one promote critical thinking while also getting through the syllabus and preparing the kids for the exam? And to understand why I wanted to do that, you have to understand the context of South African education at the time and also the context of where I was at the time. Now, I started my PhD in 2006, which is the same year when the new curriculum, the OBE curriculum, was phased in for the first time in grade 10. And then after that, it went up to the rest of the FET phase. I was also teaching the senior phase at the time, and the OBE curriculum had already been phased in a few years earlier there. So I had attended all these workshops of how to phase this in and how to do it right. And basically, they stressed what was important in the curriculum document, one of which was critical thinking.
Yes.
And the curriculum document was full of critical thinking and the critical outcomes, the learning outcomes, and all over. And besides that, I also realized, this is really important. Exam training, what's the use of it really? They get a piece of paper, but you really want them to come out of school being thinkers, because that's going to help them in life. So at these training workshops, I supposed we were being taught how to get them to think critically, because that's important in the new curriculum. And basically what I got out of it was that they were saying, stop talk and chalking, and you must get the kids speaking. So you must put them in groups to get them speaking a lot. And so at that time, it was as if the pendulum of education had swung to the side of, you must have group discussion, that's good.
Yeah.
Actually, just by the way, by today, it seems to me to have swung all the way back, so that now people are a bit disillusioned with this whole idea of group discussion. They just want to go back to talk and chalk. But at that time, now, I was wanting to make that actually work. I was thinking, well, people were saying, I don't know if group work works, and I wanted to know, how can I make it work so that they will develop the attitudes and values, and one of them being critical thinking, which the curriculum document said that they should. Now, also at the same time, I was busy reading literature into science education.
Yes. And
so I was learning about how people learn and how we should teach. So let's just discuss that a little bit. So first of all, learning.
Yes. So in terms of learning, there were these fields of thought around constructivism and, So perhaps just take us through that.
Yeah. So basically, people understand fairly well how we learn. That we learn by constructing understanding, meaning you can't just pour knowledge into the learner's head. They have to make sense of the information themselves. And then another model that I came across, which I find very useful, is called the information processing model. And what that says is that we're bombarded with all sorts of information through our senses. That goes into our sensory memory. We can't pay attention to all of that. It's just overwhelming. That's what autistic children have a problem with. But if we don't have autism, we pay attention only to a fraction of that. And that goes into our short-term memory, also called our working memory. And that's everything we can think of simultaneously at any one moment. And that's very limited. That's actually what limits learning, because short-term memory can only hold about 7 items. And that includes things like noise and hunger and stress and confusion, whatever, that take up space, leaving less for learning. And then from the short-term or working memory, we store some stuff into long-term memory, and we can also retrieve from there. So now, looking at those two theories of how we learn, which are compatible with one another, it's not that they're competing. Now, of course, we need to ask, how should we teach so that we'll support good learning? So on one hand, because the learners construct knowledge, we should get them discussing in groups. Then they're making sense of the stuff, surely. But on the other hand, if they're discussing in groups, there's so much noise that's adding cognitive load to the working memory, that's shrinking the size that you can use for learning.
And they're not storing or getting the real thing into long-term memory.
Maybe.
Yeah.
On the other hand, perhaps the motivation that social interaction gives when they're discussing expands the size of short-term memory, because they've shown that does happen. So really the issue is, how do we actually get them learning well? How should we behave as teachers to get them learning well with these competing tensions of, in one way, we should get them speaking a lot. In another way, we should have a nice, quiet classroom to reduce cognitive load. So what I generally found was teachers said, that stuff, it's fine for the textbooks, but you just throw it away when you get to actual practice. And I didn't want to do that. I thought, I've got to be able to put into practice the theory that I learn. And so I wanted to find out how to do that right.
And so is that what led you to do your PhD?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And so just take us through that process. You're a full-time teacher, but you're still going to embark on this research project.
Yes. Well, fortunately, it was to do with my teaching, so it's not as if it was something extra, although it always does add extra load, of course. But what I did was, for 3 years, I collected data every day from my learners. And so I had a video camera in the class, I wrote reports, I got them to write in their journals and everything. And so I collected data from everything that was happening, and I underwent a process of action research. Now, what action research means is that you start off with an idea, like I had an idea from all those contexts that I referred to earlier, of how to get it right, that I was getting them active and getting them thinking critically. And then I put that idea into practice and collected data, like I've been describing from those sources, and then sort of evaluated, well, was my idea right? And obviously it wasn't. And so then I modified my idea, and then the next time I taught another section, I now put into practice this new idea. And so I went through these cycles there were something like 50 cycles in total over the period of 3 years. And what I'm going to describe here as the ladder approach was what emerged as kind of like the answer, one of the answers of how to promote critical thinking while also getting the kids ready for the exam and getting through the curriculum.
And that's really the critical thing, to recognize that it's not one or the other. It's not just drill and practice and learning to pass an exam, but you really want to develop that critical understanding.
That's right. Although it's very easy to say that, it's quite difficult to know how to get that right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So out of your data and out of your question, what was the key question? Because, I mean, you've described it, but so let's just go to that key question, because I think that's important. Out of any research, you've got to have a key question.
That's right.
How should learning tasks be designed and used in teaching to promote critical thinking? So again, that was the focus within the South African physical science curriculum, national curriculum. But what was critical thinking then? And I think you've got a quote that's really quite nice about that. Would you take us through your idea of critical thinking and value the evidence of that? Oh, sorry, I've got the wrong slide, but let's just get the right slide for critical thinking. There we go. Talk to us about critical thinking for a minute.
There are a number of definitions. I chose this one because it's nice and brief.
Yes.
And so here you can see that there are 3 important things here. One, it's sensitive to context, reliant on criteria, and conducive to judgment. So it's, in other words, it's thinking that shifts according to what the context is. It's not just straitjacketed that I can only think this, everything's black and white. And it's conducive to judgment, meaning that you weigh up pros and cons of various things and make a reasoned judgment, not just according to what I feel like, just driven by emotion, but driven by reason. And it's reliant on criteria. Again, not just on what do I feel like, but always checking against various criteria. How does this judgment compare against these various criteria? In other words, it's thorough, deep thinking that continually monitors itself. So it's metacognitive, meaning that it's thinking about one's own thinking, monitoring, am I being biased by my own prejudices, or is this reasonable? Am I forming a reasonable judgment based on the evidence
that I'm presented with?
Yeah.
So if that's our framework for critical thinking, and that's really what you were interested in your research, you wanted to answer that research question about critical thinking. Talk to us about the criteria that you would need to go to recognize whether critical thinking is taking place. And I think you've got something on that over here.
Well, actually, the criteria of whether critical thinking was happening, I used the definition. So were they sensitive to context? Were they reliant on criteria? And was it conducive to judgment? Were they making a judgment backed up by the evidence? But you see, there are quite a number of studies looking at how can we promote critical thinking.
Yes.
They tend to be quite short-term. The researcher goes into the class for a little period and you see critical thinking happening, and that's all good and well, but a teacher needs something that practically works, that they get through the syllabus too. So my research was more than just the critical thinking. It was also getting through the curriculum. So I needed criteria to know whether my tasks were effective in terms of both of those.
Okay.
Yeah. So I needed to see that they were actually applying critical thinking, and also that it was compatible with the curriculum, as in that we were getting through in time, and also that they were doing fine in the tests.
Yes.
And then also it needed to be there needs to be evidence of good learning. I mean, critical thinking is very closely linked to good learning. So if I see good learning, it's quite likely that there's also critical thinking happening and that I'm getting through the syllabus. So what is good learning? Good learning can be seen when there's effort, but attainability as well.
Yeah.
Without effort, you can't get real learning. I know some people think everything must be easy and we must just slide and cruise through, You know, but it's not like that. Then you're not really pushing the boundaries of your skills and your knowledge. So there's got to be effort involved. But of course, it's no good just having effort for effort's sake.
Yes.
Because one can have so much effort, and I did find that in the earlier cycles of my action research, the kids were thinking critically, yes, and they were applying so much effort, and they were really trying, but going around in circles, and so then that's no use. So it needs to be effort that leads you somewhere, and that's actually that the task is attainable, and you emerge from the confusion to clarity.
Okay, and I think that's what a lot of learners have difficulty with. They seem to put in lots of hours in studying, but they're not actually getting the results they want.
Yeah, well, those are the good learners. The
Yes,
others are just lazy.
Are not getting them.
Yeah,
But
so I was trying to make the lazy ones put in more effort, and those that are, you know, but effort that leads somewhere
Yes.
for all of them. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so in terms of the study then, you've sketched very nicely and that there's this broad sense of twofold. You're wanting to improve the cognitive conceptual development as well as get through a clear understanding of being able to prepare for an exam. And that's often something that teachers battle with, getting those two things. So what emerged? What's the crucial thing?
Yes.
Is that the ladder approach?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, I tell you what, I think we've sketched the background really well, and we've got a fundamental sense of where we're going. But we're going to go to a short break now, and when we come back, I'm going to get Angela to explain to us a little bit more detail of what this ladder approach is about, and show us some examples of things that she's implemented in classrooms in which you might want to take a similar approach to in your teaching. So don't go away, we'll be back in a short while.